Alright guys, so I was thinking, it's been a while. I got a lot of videos out and I don't have very many that really go over all the swaps at once. I did have to make a little road trip and it was on a completely different day to get some video on the GMC 1500 swap. But anyway, I wanted to go through each of my builds and kind of just show you how each one of them turned out all at once. And so got them all lined up here. A little bit of snow today, and yeah, I figured we'd start with my Jeep here. This was my first swap about it's probably almost been 7 years now that this thing's been running the old Volkswagen. But yeah, this is kind of my introductory into swaps and what got it all started. So it was already, when I bought it, a pretty heavily modified 97 Jeep Wrangler. It's got the long arms and full skid plates, Dana 44 rear, and just the Dana 30 front. But it's locked up and jacked up pretty high in the air here. So I guess I don't know where to start with each one of these, but we'll go ahead and pop the hood here. So this was my very first swap again, and I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. So just kind of threw it together with some forums I found. Little did I know there was Facebook and everything else displaying all kinds of good info. So I probably would go back and redo a lot of stuff on this if I was going to do it again. And just would have done a few things different. Definitely would have moved the engine farther forward here. It is pretty crammed against the firewall. And I already have custom drive lines, so that wouldn't have been a big deal. I do recently have this new GTB 2056 turbo on there, but it is running 240 injectors. It's had a lot of stuff on it over the years. I've probably switched turbos on it, I don't know, 6 times. Just messing around with stuff, different injectors. I learned a lot of stuff on this Jeep. So that being said, it's currently sitting around 200 horsepower on, I think, 32 pounds of boost, and it scoots real good. It really outperforms everything else I have as well. I don't know if it's just the weight distribution, taking so much weight off the front of this thing. If you guys have seen some of my early videos, it'll lift a tire off the ground if I step on it when the boost kicks in. So it's way heavier in the back, actually, with body armor than it is in the front, which makes it do really well in the snow. I have gotten through so much stuff that I don't know. I think the weight distribution over a pickup really gives it an advantage, because it really does just wheel great. So I don't know specifics on here. It's running an AX15 transmission, a little bit beefier clutch, and everything's pretty normal for a Jeep build behind that. So not a whole lot there. Definitely needs a bigger intercooler, but I haven't done a whole lot of highway use with this thing, so I don't use a whole lot of boost off-road, or at least it's for short periods of time. So that's kind of just the quick rundown on it. There's definitely a lot of room with lift. I've got just all kinds of clearance around everything. So that sure helps. And it made this swap really easy starting out. I did not have hardly any complications. In fact, I kind of did a whirlwind build on this thing and threw it together in a weekend. And I had it running and on the road in about 3 days with a lot of prep work ahead of time, but it swapped over really nice. And so that kind of set me up for my next swap, which this was probably 3 years later, 4 years later, I think, that I did the Toyota. I've been driving it about 3 or 4 years now, and I really enjoyed the Jeep so much I wanted something I could do more of a full-time daily driver. The Jeep's a little too tall for that, but I do like the Jeep for, again, its traction and off-roading. The pickup does not get into the same places, and I guess I could build it to do the same thing, but at the same time it wouldn't ride as nice on the highway, because I set the cruise at 84 mile an hour all the time in this Toyota, and it just cruises. So anyway, we'll pop the hood on this guy now. So this was the same engine basically. They're both like a 2001 to 2003 ALH, and I guess I should say all three of them are, but used the same engine. It was familiar to me, so it went in about the same. It's definitely a lot tighter fit in here, and I ended up hooking up just about everything on here. We've got air conditioning, and it's almost all original. Just everything's functioning as it did before. Again, it's pretty much factory behind the TDI. It is the R150 5-speed transmission, and this guy took a little more time. I guess part of it is knowing all the things that I changed. I went ahead and did a new turbo right off the bat on the Toyota instead of running it a couple years with the stock one. So there was just more investment, and I knew what kind of stuff wouldn't work. I went ahead and fit a much bigger intercooler in the Toyota right away. And I actually still have more cooling issues with the Toyota. I'm not sure if it's this front end of the bumper. Definitely covers a lot of the radiator and the intercooler and everything, but again, it just really turned out working well to reuse a lot of stuff here. Just Toyota hoses going right to Volkswagen accessories, and same thing with all of these really. I have pretty well just reused everything I could. Both of these swaps, I did not really touch the electrical. I was not familiar with it or comfortable with it, and so most of the Volkswagen's wiring is actually all coiled up here. You can kind of see it on the Jeep, I suppose, too. I need to go back and make new harnesses for both of these now, but that early on process, I pretty much tried to leave everything original, and it's a lot more cluttered that way. But I got them on the road and didn't have a whole lot of money into either one of them, so both of these swaps turned out pretty great. The Jeep is running 488 gears with those 35s, and that's pretty wrapped up, but that thing is just a brick wall on the highway. I can't believe how much wind that thing catches, even being it's actually lighter than the pickup, and it's just crazy that it is so much harder for that thing to run against a headwind. So the Jeep runs a little over 3,000 RPM on the highway, where the Toyota is a little under. It has 33s and 410s, and that does make it a little harder to take off, though. First gear is pretty high. I do enjoy the lower first gear with those 488s on the Jeep, but other than that, again, I really didn't do a whole lot of modifications to either of these. They are pretty much normal behind the engine, so that definitely helped a lot. And as far as the specs on the Toyota, the I got a funky intake on here. I got to work on something else. I've been moving it around to get fresh air in the summer. Threw this thing on for the winter time. But anyway, this is a pretty hard to get turbo. It's a GTC 2262. It's off a 5.2 liter Volvo box truck in Finland. Well, overseas basically. And yeah, it's a monster. I've got it here. We welded it to one of those Chinese manifolds there, and just got a 3-inch downpipe and exhaust on it. But anyway, that thing will run a lot of boost. But as far as this guy, I've got 260 nozzles and running about 36 pounds of boost to this guy, and we do have that max boost limited to over 2500 RPM to hopefully save the rods. As you guys, if you were following this thing, I think bend the rods on the first engine I had in here. This is actually the second one. But anyway, this thing runs really good, and with the amount of boost we can run, that with that turbo, we're running it way over to kind of lean out the mixture. We're running over normal boost and less fuel to keep my EGTs down so that I can tow with this guy and still be under 1,000-degree EGTs most of the time. The heat of the summer is rough, but generally I just take it easy for a few months and then it's cooling off again already. But after that, it wasn't too long and my brother-in-law's Chevy project came up, and so I'm gonna go ahead and go to that video. I had to go into town and it was a whole different day. There's actually no snow on the ground for that video, but check that out. Alright, and here is the Chevy GMC swap here. Had to drive over and get a video of it sitting at work. My brother-in-law pretty much drives this thing every day, so it's about the only place I can catch it at most of the time. But just to kind of go over it to start with, it's a 91. So it had, they call it a 4L60, but it's pre-electronics, so it just has the electric lockup, but the shifting is all done mechanically with the TV cable. So that made it pretty easy to swap into. But this thing is all original. Pretty much picked it up as a roller with a blown engine, and we were talking about trying to fix up a 350 for it, and I joked that it'd be pretty funny to put a TDI on this thing, and well, here we are. So it's got the stock 373 gears, and a lot of guys think it's two-wheel drive just because we did put some super small tires on it so we wouldn't have to re-gear the axles. It's pretty much just thrown together as cheap as we could. Those are like a 235, 75, 15. Pretty sure there's guys lifting VWs and running that size tire, but it gets around pretty well like that. And the 4L60 has a pretty tall overdrive, so we're still running about 2,400 RPM on the highway like that. So it does all right, although there are definitely some hills we need to downshift on with how big this thing is. And it's just a pretty flat front end. Catches a lot of wind. I'm actually surprised how much wind it catches. You can just tell it's working harder than my Dakota that's way taller, because the Dakota is just quite a bit more aerodynamic, honestly, as funny as it sounds. Anyway, let's go under the hood here. So this is my first and so far only PD engine swap here with the BEW. Most of the PDs are pretty similar as far as that goes, but this is what we had available. And honestly, I don't know that an ALH would have fit in here better. The if you check out down here, the pumpkin is just completely in the way of the where the AC compressor would have been, so that would have definitely had to been deleted. But we were able to squeeze the power steering in there, and we're probably going to look at later on getting the AC put back in, being this truck obviously had AC to start with. But the other issue we had was trying to keep this low budget. We really didn't want to move everything forward and have to get drive lines, and that ended up being a real pain because, as you can see, that thing is stuffed back in there. We had to push the firewall back pretty far with a hammer to get the tandem pump back there. So definitely could have used to bring this thing forward quite a bit. But just to kind of go over the specs on it, it's got stock, the stock original injectors. This is a GTC 1549, so off of the newer 2.0 TDIs overseas, and that kind of bolts right on with, it's like a BHW or a European manifold, so that made it pretty slick to put that guy on there. And that turbo has made it to where we've got it tuned for just under 30 pounds of boost, with the stock injectors on the BEW. I'm not really sure what that would be at for horsepower. We mostly have the boost running high to keep the EGTs down, because that's what I found, at least at elevation. The more boost you can run with the least amount of fuel, the better. But obviously that creates a lot of cylinder pressure. So it does have upgraded PD 150 head bolts, and we did actually end up going through and rebuilding the bottom end, and it's got a new cam in it. But again, I couldn't really tell you for sure what the power's at here. Somewhere between 160 and 200, whatever those BEW injectors can flow on 30 pounds of boost. It definitely has probably the safest max fueling you could put on them. And if you guys have watched any of the videos on this thing, it gets up and goes pretty good. My brother-in-law mostly drives this thing back and forth to work, so it doesn't get a whole lot of highway. And we have noticed, I think the highway MPG suffers a little just trying to keep this thing up at speed. But it moves around pretty well, and right around 20 miles a gallon is pretty standard for it. We've seen 21 or 22, but if you push it hard, we're getting down to 18 or so. But just driving it easy around town, it's been right there close to 20. So he's pretty well more than pleased with it. It's obviously not a 350, but it makes it fun to drive, and he just really enjoys it. So I would call it a success for a swap. I mean, it's going to be pretty hard to tow a trailer with it, and we're not really sure how it's going to do in the summertime, if we get the AC hooked up and everything. But the intercooler fit right in there, pretty cool. Had to notch some stuff out there, and it's just running the factory radiator. But that's pretty much the overview on the GMC K1500 swap. So that's kind of where we're at with it. There's a lot of things we could do different, but it is kind of a low budget build, so we just kind of running it as is for now. And then now on to my latest build. This Dakota has kind of been quite an ordeal, but I pretty much had to redo the entire drivetrain on this thing to get it where we wanted it at, and so that has been quite a process, way more involved than, like I say, I spent 3 days on my Jeep. I think I spent almost a year on this Dakota getting it somewhat done, and then still had a ton of issues, but that's to be expected when you're just changing everything on it. So this is a 2001 Dakota, and it also has a 2001 ALH in it. This is a much heavier vehicle to start with, and then I actually picked this thing up already 1-ton axle swapped, so it is just huge. And that, with just the size of it, puts it at about 5,300 pounds. So it's almost 1,500 pounds heavier than my other two swaps. So just quite a bit different getting it to work with this thing. And honestly, I'm not going to even say that it's really worth doing a TDI swap in a vehicle this big, just because I'm barely breaking 20 miles a gallon with it. And it's just a lot of vehicle to move for these little engines. But I honestly just wanted it for a hunting trail rig. It's got a lot of body work to be done on it. You can kind of see the sun's being nice to all those dents. And Bondo I've already started working on, but its kind of purpose was maybe a daily driver for my wife in the wintertime, back and forth to town and stuff like that. And I think we have really achieved that with the build. So I'm overall pretty pleased with it. I do want to get some paint on it and that, but I'll go ahead and pop the hood on this guy now. So under the hood of this guy, I have definitely perfected all of my methods of doing the swap. So I spent a lot of time just trying to keep this engine bay looking clean and just getting all the loose ends figured out that I had on the other swaps. So the wiring is nice and tidy. It has a very simple wiring harness, so there's just not a lot of clutter under here, and overall it turned out really well. I do have a huge F350 radiator in here. I've got an intercooler almost the size of my 6.4 Power Stroke. It's about 4 inches thick there, you can see. So I did a lot of steps to try to make this thing run as efficient and cool as I could, but it is a big sucker going down the road. And I think if anybody's seen this one, it is my latest build, but it has a Jeep AW4 behind this 2001 ALH. They did not ever end up making a Dodge adapter, so I had to go over to Jeep. But then after that, it goes to a Dodge from the AW4 Jeep transmission, and a Dodge NP231 bolts right to that. So after that, it's kind of set up like my Jeep, at least a lot of similarities. And then the obviously the axles, but just have some drive lines going from half-ton Dodge to 1-ton Dodge. It has 1-ton Dodge. Everything's 1-ton except for the coil springs, I should say, and the leaf springs. Those are swapped out for half-ton, which makes it ride really nice down the highway that way. But I was able to retain the air conditioning in this guy. I don't have it set up yet, but we'll get it here before summertime. I have the AC condenser there squeezed in between. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of little details on each one of them, and I'll definitely make a video on anything specific if anyone has any questions. But if you guys can kind of see just by looking over it, it all goes together the same way. I mean, I used a lot of the same methods I did on my first swap on this one. The same hoses bolt to the same places, even switching completely different vehicles and drivetrains, it's all very, very generic. I mean, it's got the same coolant lines, the same fuel lines, the same electrical. Probably the gauges are the biggest difference on a lot of these. And if you've checked out some of my setups on there, I can go ahead and this is my latest one, and again, probably turned out the best, but we've got the ultra gauge there in the middle, giving us all the readings that VW sends out digitally, and then all your basic stuff, EGT, fuel gauge, boost gauge, oil pressure, and transmission temperature that we can't get through the ultra gauge. I've got all those in there. And then rather than messing with a transmission controller on this AW4, I went ahead and used a manual gate shifter here. Got it mounted to the dash right by the controller there, and so I still put it in drive like normal, and then that kind of gives me a hand rest here, and I can shift through the gears, first to second to third to fourth, and then once I'm in second or third, I've got just a little torque converter lockup button here I can flip. It wasn't a good place to put it here, and I may do something different, but this works pretty slick to just shift the gears. The TDI pretty much needs boost around here to do anything at high elevation, so it's nice to be able to hold the gears when you're going around a corner so it doesn't upshift when you let off, and I can stay in the boost and be ready to take off again once I get through the corner. So I do like that about manually shifting it. Got the cruise control working, running the speed sensor from the Dodge to feed the Volkswagen, and then it's just a matter of switches and push buttons to set cruise. So just very, very complete and finished in my opinion, and just turned out as good as I could have expected. So yeah, overall this is my lineup here of TDI swaps and how they all turned out. I guess kind of just to reiterate there, I get with the Jeep being as brick wall as it is, I've only seen about 24 miles a gallon out of that at best, but I do drive 75 most of the time, so probably could get closer to 30 slowing down some. And the Toyota does quite a bit better than that. I often see 28 to 30 mpg even at 80 mile an hour. So very pleased with that for a daily driver. But again, keeping it low to the ground is key for that. So the Dakota obviously wasn't really going for fuel mileage. I expected it to be better than the 360 Dodge I pulled out, but it's got to be way more aerodynamic than the Jeep, because it's honestly taller and, like I say, almost 1,500 pounds heavier. And I have yet to see much lower than 20 miles a gallon out of this thing. So I think I did forget to go over the gearing on that. I did end up putting 513 gears in this, and that with those are about between a 35 and a 36-inch tall tire with the metric system on those 18-inch wheels, but that runs me about 2,800 RPM at 70, 2,800 RPM, and that's kind of its happy place there. And that's where I'm getting that fuel mileage from. So overall, they all do 20s, so pretty decent miles per gallon considering I'm at about 5,000 foot elevation. I suspect they'd all do quite a bit better, lower elevation and out of the hills and the mountains here. As you can see, my property has almost 120 foot of elevation change. So that's kind of what my driving conditions look like. But anyway, that is just an overview of all of the swaps to kind of update anybody that hasn't kept up with them. So hopefully that's some useful information for people. So thanks for watching.